Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that's going to totally reframe how you think about money, value, and honestly, time itself. We're zooming out, taking a real cosmic perspective on wealth, using hard data from physicists and engineers to see how the laws of nature actually dictate the growth of financial networks. Let's get right into it. Now, you know the critique, right? For years, people have said digital assets are just a speculative tulip bubble, just waiting to burst. But the data we're looking at today paints a fundamentally different picture. This network isn't some fragile bubble. According to the math, it actually behaves like an immortal, growing metropolis. Think about it. It's a city, not a flower. All right, part one, the cosmic ruler. Okay, let's talk thermodynamics for a second. Have you ever heard of an adiabatic system? Basically, it's a closed energy system with absolutely zero heat loss. It's the kind of perfect conservation engineers have to assume when they design, say, an airplane wing. Well, Michael Saylor points out something fascinating in our sources. Traditional fiat currencies, they're open systems. They constantly leak energy through inflation. But a mathematically capped digital ledger acts as a perfect adiabatic system. Economic energy moves through time and space with literally zero lapse. No leaks, no decay. And that brings us to this profound realization from astrophysicist Stephen Perrinode. He says, Bitcoin is the first scientifically precise monetary standard in human history. I mean, think about that. Unlike fiat or even gold, which are always subject to human ego, sudden supply spikes, or government meddling, this network is backed purely by energy, math, and game theory. It is quite literally a ruler that no committee can ever stretch. Moving on to Section 2, exponentials versus power laws. So there's a massive difference between these two mathematical concepts. We always hear about exponential growth in finance, and it sounds great, right? But in nature, it's highly unstable. A bacteria doubling endlessly eventually eats all its resources and just dies. Even a stock trajectory like Nvidia's right now, if you projected that out exponentially forever, it would eventually eclipse all the wealth in the world, which is obviously impossible. As the old saying goes, trees don't grow to the sky. Power law growth, on the other hand, is completely resilient. It's eternal. It's the exact scaling blueprint nature uses for cities, biology, and even whole galaxies. Which leads us to this staggering data point: 150 years. That is the maximum lifespan for almost all corporations. They almost always die within a century and a half. Why? Well, because they rely on that unstable exponential growth we just talked about. Eventually, they hit market saturation, they face fierce competition, run out of resources, and collapse. They're fundamentally mortal. But nature has a workaround, and it's called the power law. On a log-log chart, a power law forms a perfectly straight line. It's this mathematically universal pattern of organic, resilient growth that scales proportionally over time. It is the exact same blueprint nature uses to scale the energy consumption of animals, the layout of human cities, and the orbits of the planets. It's literally nature's mechanism for stable, eternal scaling. Okay, Section 3. Building Cyber Manhattan. So what actually makes a city immortal? It's the fact that it's organic. Which brings us to a really cool biological term, autopoiesis. It describes a self-creating, self-maintaining system that establishes its own intrinsic rules for development. The Bitcoin network is an autopoietic network. It scales entirely organically from the bottom up. There's no CEO, no central planning committee. And because it grows purely through the free interaction of its participants, it's completely immune to centralized tampering. Astrophysicist Giovanni Santastasi breaks down exactly how this adoption and network effect compounds into value. It's pretty mind-blowing. Step 1. The value of a network grows to the square of its users. That's Metcalfe's law. Step 2. The number of wallets, or the users, is actually growing to the cube of time, just like the early days of the internet. Step 3. When you combine those two things, the price physically grows to the 6th power of time. According to the research, this isn't random. It's a mathematical certainty born directly from network physics. And that brings us to this incredibly specific number, 5.8. Or, let's just round it to 6. This is the exact mathematical exponent, the fingerprint really, of the price over time. Essentially, this means every time the network doubles in age, the price scales up by a massive factor of roughly 65. Again, this isn't just wild speculation. It's a physical property of how this specific network absorbs economic energy. Next up, Section 4, fat nodes and stability. Now, as any system gets this massive, it naturally develops substructure. In network science, they call these fat nodes. These are massive, highly connected participants in the network. Think big institutional holders, ETFs, and major corporate treasuries. A lot of people fear that Wall Street is somehow taking over, but the science tells us a different story. Institutional adoption is actually a biological necessity for the network. These fat nodes act like giant shock absorbers. They shift the network away from those volatile early exponential bursts and lock it right into that stable hierarchical power law we've been talking about. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how this institutional structure works in the real world. When you look at correlated exposure across corporate treasuries and yield products, companies like MicroStrategy are functioning exactly as these stabilizing fat nodes. They're providing structured, leveraged, heavily managed exposure to the traditional financial system. By soaking up volatility and generating synthetic yield, they permanently anchor the asset right into the traditional capital stack. So here's the crucial takeaway. You really have to reframe how you view market volatility. When the price goes sideways or even dips, that is absolutely not the sound of the network failing. Sideways price action is actually the sound of a giant vacuum. It's the sound of algorithms, passive index funds, and those institutional fat nodes systematically gobbling up the last of the available speculative retail supply. The asset is just moving from weak hands into strong, immortal hands. Which brings us to our final section, a precise monetary standard. To quickly summarize the core takeaways from all this research, we are looking at an asset with absolute scarcity, hard capped at 21 million. It runs on a decentralized ledger that literally no human can tamper with. It functions as a thermodynamically sound adiabatic system that doesn't leak economic energy. And thanks to its power law nature, it is totally immune to that 150-year mortality rate that plagues traditional corporations. It doesn't decay like fiat, it won't crash like an exponential stock, it just persists. And here's a data point that should really wake you up. Based on this precise power law curve, and we're talking about tracking over 15 years of hard data here, not guessing, physicists project with a 90% confidence interval that the math leads to $10 million per coin in just 20 years. That's simply where that 5.8 mathematical fingerprint takes the network as it continues to absorb global capital. Which leads us to this incredibly profound observation from physicist Giovanni Santastasi. He says, "We are turning corporations into cities. By tying their balance sheets to this thermodynamically sound network, mortal companies are basically attempting to cheat death. They're taking their easily diluted exponential fiat value and anchoring it to a decentralized power law. They're effectively trying to gain the immortality of a metropolis." So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one lingering question. Now that you know the physics of wealth, knowing the difference between a dying exponential system and an immortal power law network, will you denominate your future in an unstable exponential curve destined to crash, or in the eternal mathematics of the cosmos? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.